You are listening to I Am Interchange.
I Am Interchange.
I Am Interchange.
I Am Interchange.
Fostering curiosity, education, and empathy by exploring the controversial and the provocative.
I Am Interchange.
Welcome back to the I Am Interchange podcast, everybody. Tate Chamberlin here for an impromptu interview with Vancouver-based social entrepreneur and culinary badass, Mark Brand. He's opened and run several successful restaurants, ranging from fine dining to diners. And in 2013, started the highly successful meal token program out of his restaurant, Save On Meats, that's prepared over 2 million meals for the homeless and underserved. Mark has lived in Nigeria, Melbourne, Australia, and spent the majority of his early life in the Canadian maritime province of Nova Scotia. But the kitchen is where he's always felt most at home. That love turned toxic at times in Mark's life, when the intense culture of commercial kitchen life led to alcohol and substance abuse, and stints of homelessness laced between times of tremendous professional success. Mark has now been completely sober for 2 years. He credits that achievement to what he describes as a one-step program, truly choosing to love himself for the first time in his life. That journey of self-love has done away with his anxiety about how others judged him and led to the realization that FOMO, fear of missing out, is actually a social illness leading to death and destruction by way of addiction. Through our conversation, Mark credits that self-love and his sobriety with the clarity and focus that he now feels, and questions if any of us are truly capable of being clear about our potential while numbing with substances or addictive behaviors. This episode is because of Hatch. I'm with Mark Brand, who's swinging through Bozeman, Montana. We just took a nice soak in the hot springs and had a dang breakfast. And this is a total impromptu interview. How's it going, man?
Man, I'm in such a good space right now. I'm like staring at a windowsill, for context for our fourth wall viewers, of semi-ripe and ripened tomatoes. There's a school bus that's being converted into a house in a field behind us. And then a giant satellite dish that is making me feel like there's definitely probably aliens.
They're watching you.
Usually.
We're at Blunderbuss, our maker house, where we have lots of little residencies going on. You want to talk a little bit about you and where you grew up? You're sure. Canadian, eh? I
am minus the A, I think. You know, I think I've just avoided it. Identity politics is an interesting subject. And being defined as a citizen from somewhere has always come with a lot of bias. And so I've sort of taken my vernacular as an intentional way to communicate with folks devoid of that. So when I was growing up, to get too wacky with it, I'm a rap fan. I've been listening to hip-hop music my whole life. I was a rap DJ for almost 10 years. Well, I continue to be one in the background. And so all of those stories and accents really impacted the way that I speak, even though I grew up in my formative years in the Maritimes. So I should have a very thick Canadian sort of fisherman style accent, but I gravitated more to like the tip of the Isle of Manhattan. And then I spent a bunch of years in Nigeria off and on, and then I lived for 9 years in Melbourne, Australia. And so my accent really just doesn't have a form to it. And I remember I dated a girl for a while, and we went to New Orleans just after Katrina, and we were down there doing some work. And she said, "It bothers me that your accent changes when we go to different places. It feels disingenuous to me."
Oh, so you like picked it up in all of these different places that you've lived, and she kind of picked up on that you're like appropriating each culture and you kind of adapt to where you're at.
Did you talk to her before this interview? Like that's one energy you could pick up. The other is that I feel I'm an empath by birth, and so I generally try to make people as comfortable as possible by either coming into their sort of place and identifying, but my accent, unbeknownst to me, would start to pick up little hints.
I've noticed I do that when I travel. If I'm like in the UK or something, I'll try and like fit in with that like British accent. I'll like totally soak it up in my life.
It's also amazing.
Yeah.
Like it's super incredible. Natural dialects and regional dialects are fucking fascinating.
Is it a better way to experience where you're at to pick up the language a little bit?
I think if you're spending any length of time, it's like, how do you learn Spanish best? Well, go to a Spanish native-speaking country. Like,
sure.
We used to do exchange when we were kids learning French in Quebec or in Montreal, and that's how you actually learn a language, is by naturalizing. So I think I don't think you drop into London and do a shitty accent. I don't think that's great. But if you're living there, picking up some slang that's regional and is relative to what you're working in, for sure. I don't want you to like drop in and be a yardie. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. But for sure, like naturalized, I still get it as a Canadian because I'm not sure whether to say restroom, bathroom, loot, like what do I say? And often I'll say it in parts of America that aren't touched by like the coasts and be like, where's your, and I kind of struggle to like, which word is it going to be?
loo.
Where's the toilet? I'm like, that doesn't feel right. It sounds dirty. Like, I don't know.
Sounds dirty. Yeah, I always say restroom. Whenever I say I'm going to the bathroom, people are always like, oh, thanks for sharing. You know, kind of that grossed out comeback.
You got to stop hanging out with all the grade 5 kids still. I feel like you've outgrown that.
So you grew up in Canada, had this extensive traveling experience, and you've lived in lots of different places. What was earning your first dollar like? What did you do to earn your first dollar?
Very first dollar cash outside of chores was I was a paper boy. So I got my first paper route when I was like 10, 11. And I remember the bag being extraordinarily heavy. And I didn't have a growth spurt until I was like 13 or 14, so I was kind of little. And dragging it up and down hills in Nova Scotia and feeling like, I'm really working hard for this. And so that felt amazing. Like that, the ethic around timeliness and how that had to happen. And then you were responsible for collecting the money and submitting it as well. So I was like my own little accounting firm because subscriptions were paid in cash to the paper boy who then took the money and paid the paper. And then the first job I ever got is I lied about my age to the guys who made pizza at the mall. So like Micmac Mall in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, the coolest place you could hang out was there on the weekends. There was the arcade and then there was a food court. And in the food court, there was a Lebanese-run pizza shop called John's Pizza. And the Lebanese guys who ran it were incredible. Like my first experience with like real Lebanese dudes, like character dudes, like Gold Jane's Too Tight, like the whole nine. And I lied to them for a summer job. And I was like, hey, I'd really like to work here. And I remember, I think I got paid $4.75 an hour. But they taught me how to make dough. They taught me how to make sauce from scratch. They taught me all of these things. And I felt like a fucking magician. And I'd fallen in love with culinary prior, but that was like the first paycheck I ever got for making people happy with food. So at the end of the night, like when the mall was closing, my friends would hang out and wait for me. And if there was leftover pieces of pizza, I was allowed to give them to them. And
You were popular.
Yo, that was my cool kid pass.
Yeah.
I was a free pizza guy.
That's a totally legitimate role in childhood.
Fuck yeah, it is.
When a friend has that kind of job.
I was drunk with power, Tate. Drunk with the power of the aged slice.
Did you hold it over their heads at all?
Never.
Yeah.
I was very
That's
excited
good.
to share. I'm a big sharer. I'm an oversharer as well. If we're going to get into that language.
So what came first? Your passion for cooking or kind of, I want to talk a little bit about addiction.
Sure.
What was the timeline of all of that?
I mean, I think we could like zoom out on addiction and talk about not just addiction to substance, but addiction to wanting to be liked or loved. Like that's an actual addiction as well, right? The need to fit in that. And then my love of food, I would say those tracks ran directly together. I was literally born in Scotland, moved to Tunisia when I was 1, moved to London when I was 3, moved to Alberta when I was 5, moved to Nova Scotia when I was 9, uprooted from Nova Scotia consistently, very tumultuous time in my childhood, ended up outside, lived in rough a couple of times. So I always wanted to feel safe, and in safe I wanted to have people, and in having people I wanted to please. And so those things, once I saw, and I'll start with my aunt who passed away 2 years ago now, but she was like a mentor and a dear friend. She's always a chef, but an untrained chef. And so I'd watch her cook, and in comparison and contrast to other people cooking where it was very measured and very timed, she would like cigarette in mouth, Manhattan in hand, like literally dropping ashes into the spaghetti sauce.
Yum.
Make the best fucking food I'd ever tasted in my life. And I was fascinated by her and in love with her. Like I was still deeply in love with her.
How old were you, would you say?
9.
Oh,
But
okay,
like
so
before that even, like I would go and visit and they were poor. Like my mom's side of the family was poor, my dad's side of the family was poor too. It was just, they were poor. The first people to ever have money in my mom's family was essentially my mom, and my dad's family, my dad, right? So those experiences were still very much like we cobbled together family meals, and my aunt would be like 5 drinks in and come in and start rifling through the cabinets and make me something to eat, and it would be fucking delicious. Like every single time, she just knew how things worked. And so I was fascinated by her and also adored her. And she worked in service. She was a bartender. She was a chef. She was a publican. She opened a bed and breakfast. All failed, bankrupt multiple times, and ultimately diagnosed with polycystic kidney disease, same disease my mom has, same disease I have, and succumbed to it a couple of years ago, but went out kicking and screaming. And her generosity was also part of my socialization. When we would walk the streets together in Nova Scotia, she would take me shopping or whatever. She never had any money, but she always had money for people who needed it. So people would ask her, and she'd literally go into her purse and like find a magical 20. And every time I left her, there would be money in my pockets. And I'd never know how she got it there. I thought she was a magician, but I'd reach in, and she didn't do it for any other reason aside she wanted me to feel special, and she wanted me to feel like I had something. So all of those things intersect for me, because in feeding people, I would watch her customers, our family, just feel super looked after and cared for. So it's like, it's a skill I want.
It sounds like there was a lot of kind of restlessness when you moved around a lot and trying to attach to new people and friendships and being part of a new community over and over and over again. Totally. She kind of grounded you in that family that you kind of yearned for.
Definitely. And a lot of my family, I think it comes from, as I do a lot more like awareness around trauma and bias. My mom's side of the family, my grandfather died when she was 12 from polycystic kidney disease, and it's left a generational trauma. But they were all, and my grandmother at the time then got institutionalized for mental illness. So they're all like 12, 13, 9. There's a whack of them. There's like 7 of them. And they have no stability, right? So they're living with like cousins and uncles and aunts and like having to figure it out for themselves really, really early. And so there's deep-seated trust issues. So there's always a destabilization on that side of the family. And when it felt comfortable was when we all got together for family meals.
To me, the history of families used to be intergenerational. I mean, the whole family used to live in one house. I mean, doesn't sound so different than...
Yeah, sorry. And what I was talking about was the trauma that goes with it, which I'm exploring really deeply right now, that is resonant through us, whether it's 10 generations back or 5 generations back, or just like something you actually visibly witnessed. The ways in which we live and that resonates for us is really impactful, and we never address it. So it's like my mother experienced homelessness or being unhoused and mental illness and all of these other issues. While I was never directly exposed to it or just in light, it was still resonant within me.
Because she brought that presence, and you kind of were firsthand or secondhand to that experience.
100%. Yeah. And it continues on. When we talk about, if we want to get cultural about it, when we talk about domestic abuse and young people of color and white people in low poverty areas or low income areas rather witnessing domestic abuse and it being normalized for them even though they know it's wrong, it's part of a trait that they carry and that they perpetrate and you can point back to. Yeah. And it's like, it's super fucked up, but it exists. So denying it and saying every person is their own individual and they don't carry any of this shit forward is just false, first of all. And secondly, it doesn't allow us to try and intersect and fix it.
Yeah, I see. So are you still addicted to being liked?
Not at all. I'm recovering. I had a 1-step program, and it's self-love.
Great.
Yeah, and it's all it ever took. It's all it ever needed to be. But when you're still in an addiction cycle of alcohol, which I was for 25 years, and recreational narcotics, to find those spikes in serotonin, like peaks and valleys, you can never truly be 100% in your body and get to a point of love.
Which one came first? The
egg, Tate, is the answer.
The egg came first. What addiction got cured first? The addiction for substances or addiction to community and like being loved?
The alcohol had to go first. It had to go first because there's, people talk about FOMO like lightly, fear of missing out, and it shouldn't be. It's a societal ill. Right?
Okay.
So like for fear of not being accepted.
Sure.
People talk about it flippantly like, oh no, Friday night I have FOMO, I'm going to miss out. And you're like, there's an actual real cultural issue there that is painful and killing people through opioids and alcohol. This distancing, for me, it's been a literal 180 of I don't want to miss anything, or I don't want to not be the guy throwing the thing or creating a thing or being the center of a cultural attention movement, like whatever that may be. And people are like, that's ego. And I was like, no, it's safety. It creates safety for me. My ego's fine. Like, it's just safety that I require to know that there's going to be people around me that care. That is compounded by addiction. Because as you come out of the depressant cycle, your fear kicks in, your like destabilization kicks in. So as soon as you've been sober long enough, or clean and sober, and I just recommend it as a practice to anybody. You can drink your whole life, I don't care. But like take 3 months off and see what it really feels like on the other side and who you are. And if you can land that energy and keep drinking, do your thing. Whiskey's delicious. I can't. And so on the back end of that going, I should be able to actually receive love. and I was incapable of it. Destabilized every relationship, 2 marriages. Luckily, the ex-wives are still very good friends of mine, but like I couldn't go to that next level of depth with anybody because I didn't love myself.
Is loving yourself being vulnerable with yourself?
That's part of it.
What
sure.
part of yourself did you have trouble with loving the most?
I didn't believe myself. So let me just use that frame. Like I have doubled down, I've done social impact work, I've sacrificed a lot of things in my life to help others, but I also didn't know why for sure. I was destabilized. I was like, am I doing this for the creating of culture and safety for me? Or am I actually genuinely doing it because I care about other people? And that was a conversation I had to have with myself. And it always netted out in, no, you just genuinely care about other people. It's okay. But it would take me time to get there instead of living in it, right? So as soon as I was able to actually accept feedback and love in a comfortable way, which most people can't do. Like you'll notice when you give somebody a compliment, their body structure changes, their head drops down, their eyes divert, their pulse rises. Like it's uncomfortable for us to feel love from other people.
It sounds like everything I do.
It's fucking ridiculous. Like that's what we're built for, is to be encouraged and receive love from each other.
I can't take a compliment. It's so hard.
Because it's been wired out of you.
Yeah.
You've been taught not to and all this trauma and bias, right?
Yeah.
So once you get past a point, like I have a person who compliments me in this network that we're part of regularly, and I love it, or I thought I did. I've never once looked them in the eyes and received it and been quiet until this last event.
Really?
And I received it and was like, man, it's not a spike. It's not this thing that we're looking for, the rush of like reading online praise or any of those things. It's actually just a feeling of comfort and safety. We're like, oh, you do love me. So if something fucking happens to you, Tate, know that I will show up for you, and that's real.
Thank you.
Right? And that's
thank you.
that's what self-love looks like. And like the ability for you to just say, yo, that actually is real. Instead of doubting it because you don't think you're enough.
That's huge.
I'll write a fucking book.
Are you gonna write a book? So, I mean, you were homeless for a little while.
I was unhoused. And let's like
What's the difference?
For me, the difference is none. I think we have to normalize the word homelessness because 7 out of 10 people are a 1 paycheck away from destitute in North America and can very easily experience a shelter or living in a car or living, etc. All of that's homeless.
Yeah, I lived in my truck for a summer.
That's homelessness.
Yeah.
And by the definition of the word, no matter who the fuck says it, that's what that is. Now, I feel like I was unhoused because I had another option. My option was to go home, but that option was unsafe for me. It felt unsafe for me. It felt unsafe mentally and not physically, but just mentally for me. It felt unsafe to do it.
How old were you at that time?
I was a teenager and I was just like stealing car stereos at 13. You know, we were doing B&Es. Like I was rebellious and I didn't know where I fit. So I ran with the crowd. I ran with people. And then I also had an amazing set of friends on the other side so I had no need to do any of that shit. I just did it. Which was very concerning for everybody around me, right? I got locked up for the first time at 14 in juvenile, like had to get bailed out, and I felt nothing, and I was like, fuck, am I a sociopath? Like, why is this not affecting me? And it was because I was in so much pain, like of my own narrative and mentally, et cetera, that was going on, that nothing was infecting anymore. I'd become numb.
So all the trouble you were getting into, you were like reaching to feel something, but you still didn't.
Anything. So I was unsafe. I burned the bridges of like, there's only so many 14-year-olds' houses that you can sneak into and stay the night without telling the truth. And I couldn't tell the truth. There was no way that I could say, my mom and I are struggling and this is why. That's not something that I could do. And it was like programmed into me that would never be okay. There's a sanctity of a family narrative that is holier than for most people, right?
Like having to remember what you said.
No, not that part. The truth is easy. Blowing up your family.
Yeah.
Let me put it that way, right? And so
blowing up your family, like making them seem awesome and like put together.
Yeah, instead of this is completely dysfunctional, which is actually the normalized condition. So if you think about domestic abuse, right, and the people who live in it for years and years and years, they're making the excuse and they're keeping up the narrative. In a similar way, people who live unhoused, so 1 in 4 people who come out as anything aside from straight, get kicked out of their house instantly across North America. That's a stat. That person may be hiding that because they think that it takes away the opportunity for things as well. Because the narrative of being homeless is that you're dirty, that you're mentally ill, that you're addicted to drugs, that you're those things.
Right. You can't participate in society.
Most of the population isn't. They're not at all. They just are financially screwed. Or they've been in a relationship that's been abusive. Or they've come out and identified as gay or lesbian or trans. That's it. That's their blight on society. That's the crime that they've committed to end up in an unhoused state, is that they were a victim of something.
So they're more in debt and better at smoke and mirrors?
Yeah. because it's easier and it's safer, and it allows surface relationships to continue and a community to continue around you. You run a risk by polarizing people around you who don't want to deal with it. But that's the point of like deciphering who your friends are and who they aren't. Is I should be able to say to you, Tate, right now, man, I really wanted to drink this weekend, and you'll be like, cool, this is why you're not going to. It's not like, fuck, I don't want to deal with Mark's shit, which is how a lot of relationships are, right? And so you threaten them.
Like, what was your breaking point? When were you just like, you know what, fuck this, I need to really make a change? Did something drastic happen in your life?
You know, you and I were talking about like this wannabe expose article that ended up falling flat because there's nothing to expose. But one of those questions was like, why are you really sober? And I was like, I mean, first of all, fuck you. Second of all, I wish there was something bigger to point to. It was just like a bunch of dominoes in my life had fallen over multiple times. I was at Stanford University. I'm a civic innovation fellow. I'm being given the opportunity of a lifetime to be an adjunct lecturer in design thinking in shit that I care about. And I'm like, can see the change in the world that I can actually make. And I'm sitting on a park bench with 3 black homeless dudes smoking a blunt and drinking a 40 in Palo Alto.
It sounds great to me.
It was awesome.
So
freestyle rapping, like having the best time. And I was like, wait a second. I'm running.
You decided you couldn't do that also?
Yeah, I was running. I was running back to comfort. I can always find comfort in the street. I can always find comfort amongst people who are homeless and marginalized, etc. I can immediately drop into that.
It sounds like kind of an authentic piece of you that wants to do that. Will you lose that?
Never.
If you don't go back
No.
to that?
No. And for 2 years I've been sober, right, as of November, and I'm deeper in it now because I'm not in same energy. I'm in different energy. So I'm in an energy of clarity versus let me go get the next 40 and let's pass it around, which is also dangerous. And I was at a point in my life where I could explode even further, which was habitual for me, right? Which was like, I'm going to explode a relationship or I'm going to redline something. And I had a person in my life who essentially intervened as well, multiple people who intervened, not in a like, let's hold an intervention way, but just in the general like, I think you would be so much more impactful if you just stopped cocktailing so often. And there were people I deeply loved and cared about, and I had already felt it. We all know. You just don't want anybody to say it so you can keep having the party never ends, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought the party should end. I said, no, there's no definitive moment, and I've got like 20 of them now, right? I went to hang out with another social impact entrepreneur in Dallas, Texas, and super nice guy. And he took me out over the weekend. I told him I was battling with alcohol, and yet I still continued to drink, and we continued to drink, and we partied, and we stayed up late. And I was like, is this going to be my path? Am I going to be the cool kid everybody wants to invite to do the talk and to like help them with their thing, but like really just skirt around and use that as accessibility to cool things? And I had a really hard conversation.
What's wrong with that?
Lots. Because you can just bounce from one of those things to the next, and the work gets deferred.
So you're there kind of as a token?
100% is a token. Sorry, not 100%. Let's call it 50-50. But when I was really like, this problem is so urgent, I need to be 100% in the work. And I could still go to a dinner party and I could still go to a Cowboys game, but I wasn't like, then we were kind of hungover, and then we were like getting brunch, and then we were like talking about football, and then it's 4 o'clock.
Right, it's the end of the day.
I'd flown to Dallas to work with this guy on feeding millions of people. And we had to bookend the talk about work until afterwards because we enjoyed each other's company and we're just egging each other on. And I was like, what if I was the one who took a stand and put the bottle down? Then my hosts would probably act accordingly. So that's on me. That's my choice that I need to make. Do I really fucking care about this? Or am I just caring about it 50% of the time?
Maybe that initial meeting is just really learning how to connect with your future associate or partner.
I'm going to go to work in Japan and it's going to be very challenging. Let's just say that. But that's fine, and I'm okay to have that challenging and polarizing conversation. At the same point, I'm not like, don't have a drink around me. I still go to the club. I still go to shows, like, and I walk around with a highball that looks like a gin and tonic that's just soda water. Here's the cool thing about being sober, man. Everybody's like, what are you gonna do when you go out? Like, everybody has this huge question. I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, man, like, you own the restaurant. People will send you shots, and they're gonna send you bottles, etc. And I'm like, all my friends still drink. And also, if they send me a shot, it's real simple just to either pour it on the floor or not drink it. It's a conscious decision. It's not a like existential crisis, right? Or if somebody says you have a drink, I've always got one in my hand, and I have conversations with bartenders at every function when I walk in. Like, I need you for 10 seconds. Make sure this is always full. Here's $50 because I'm not going to spend anything on booze. Can you just make sure that I always have one of these in my hand so nobody tries to offer me a drink because I'm recovering? You know who will do that for you every time? Every bartender on the planet.
Someone you tip, yeah.
But who also is like invested in that. They make drunks for a living. I've been one. Like, I get it. I'm going to be the one guy that doesn't verbally abuse you later on when it's last call. Can you help me, just stay sober? So yeah, I think there's a lot in that. I feel zero lost opportunities. I feel zero FOMO. I've had every conversation you can have at 5 a.m. watching the sun come out, under every substance, sitting on every truck. Like, I've done all of it, and in a way that it wasn't a checklist. It's just that nothing incredibly positive happens for me anymore at that time of night. When I was in my 20s, man, I dreamt about changing the world and started to do it. Because I could be open enough to like have those conversations at 3 or 4 in the morning. So I don't begrudge anybody else doing them. Just for me now, I need to be focused.
It was kind of your time to explore.
Everybody has it, man.
Sure.
So you're eat a bag of mushrooms and like sit down by the water and figure out what life means for me.
Yeah.
Fuck, some of the best times of my life, dude. Like, amazing.
So you're like an all-star now. Tell me a little bit about your first project that kind of gave you the launch code to just blow up.
It was a very specific moment in one project, and I was having this conversation with somebody this weekend, which is we are taught that business is to be done by accountants and lawyers and bookkeepers, and that they will manage the back end of something for us so we're able to do the front end. And there's a separation, and there's a guarding of knowledge of sort, and an anxiety for entrepreneurs around that knowledge that traditionally turns into I pay somebody who's really good to do that, and I pay them a lot of money. And it's almost braggadocious. Right? It's like, I have the best lawyer. He's like $900 an hour. I'm like, the document's the fucking same. And I know how to sign them myself now, right? So I was in a business. One of my partners was suffering from addiction. He was my mentor and my best friend at the time. He fell to that addiction. We hadn't paid a lot of bills, and we were in a really dire place that we were going to lose the restaurant. My first restaurant named after my mom. And I took all of the papers that he left behind, which were mainly unpaid bills, and we had a family booth in the corner and huddled up in there and started to decipher the puzzle. I've always been really good at puzzles. I've always been really good at problem solving. I knew nothing about accounting or legal. And then applying the game to it.
Like how to get out of it.
How do I get out of this in a way? But then what does that mean? What does the payroll actually look like? What would it mean to be 90 days ahead of the game? What are the financial institutions offering? What is my payment company offering? What's the government going to do? I owe them $70,000. How do I get out of that? How can I use them? I actually triggered an audit intentionally to have them come in, paid accountants by me for my tax dollars, to audit me. And everybody thought I was insane. I was like, I don't know where everything is. They're forensic accountants.
So you opened yourself up to that audit to learn, basically.
Exactly. And I've always done that since. Like, whenever an audit gets triggered of our companies, I'm like, yes, because they always find money that they owe me every time.
It turned into a kind of a stressful and heartbreaking loss for you to lose your business partner, but then it also triggered this education that kind of turned priceless to you, it sounds.
This smoke and mirrors bullshit of business is hard.
So you got rid of the lawyers and the accountants. I mean, do you have a lawyer and an accountant
still,
now?
But they are very underused. I'm sorry, for my companies, I have day-to-day bookkeepers that just do the checks and balances. And then, of course, I have a CPA and a CGA that looks through everything at the end and files for us.
So now you kind of are that guy.
But I'm fluent.
I've got a guy for that.
They work in kind. They help us with the foundation. They also are registered with the government as a professional, which is important to have. But we don't need them to the point of like, you get your statements. I've seen people do this, and I was one of them way back when, where you'd have your quarterly meeting and it'd be like, oh, these are where the cost centers are. And there'd be one person leading the meeting and everybody else just nods. Mm-hmm. And so in my companies, I'm like, do you understand what this means? And if you don't, that's totally okay, because I'm going to explain it to you, and it's going to take 12 minutes with commercials. This is what a P&L actually does. Mm-hmm. This is what a balance sheet actually does. I want you to be financially literate, not only so you can service the business better, but so you can incubate and go do more business, because you're awesome. And I don't want you to be taken advantage of. So financial literacy for people who are street and transport. I know people who are in C-suite that are like, oh, I don't do that. I'm like, what do you mean you don't do? You do it every day. You get a credit card. I just pay that. Like, you have to understand how this stuff works. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're getting played in some way, shape, or form, whether you're being played because you pay 19% on your credit card, or you're being played because you don't know what the rest of this stuff, how easy it is. You're being played.
I want to know like what it's like to be a Canadian looking in at the U.S. right now.
So I decided to get sober. I'm at Stanford still. I'm at the bar drinking cranberry sodas in Palo Alto the day after the election. Let me step back a little bit. So my other civic innovation fellows are the former provost of Bucknell University, the head of the design lab for the federal government, working in federal politics, the head of the future of food for the San Francisco Unified School District, a woman of mixed race who's a lesbian, a advocate, street level advocate that co-founded Voto Latino, who's Filipino. These are the 4 most politically motivated people that I've ever spent time with in my entire life, and well-versed. The night before, we were sitting in a restaurant in Palo Alto to watch the show of Hillary winning. Mm-hmm. There was no discussion. It was just, we're going to go watch Hillary win. Period.
Just like everybody went into it.
Right? And so we're sitting in this restaurant in Palo Alto, in one of the most woke places. We're next to a yoga studio. Everybody has money in Teslas. It's a thing. And so we watch, and as it starts to turn, my table starts to turn. And I obviously stay involved in politics consistently because I want to see how it affects the marginalized, and I know what a disaster this is going to be. But their energy was of devastation. Like, it wasn't like, I'm sad, this is messed up. They were catatonic. Like, it was like they left. Stanford the next day like called an emergency thing at the D school, and we're like, how do we design our way out of this? Like we literally, it was like all hands on deck, let's do the thing. So that night I went and I'm sitting at the bar and I'm eating, and I'm like obviously destroyed about this as well as a Canadian. And the guy who's, I shouldn't say obviously, let me explain why. So the guy sitting next to me had a stroke, rehabilitated through meditation, is a yoga instructor in Palo Alto, super nice guy. We're having this lovely discussion. Doesn't turn to politics at all. We're just actually talking. I think everybody's trying to avoid talking about politics for the next week a little bit. And he's like, where are you from? Like 25 minutes, 30 minutes in the conversation. So actually, I'm a resident of Vancouver, British Columbia. And he's like, oh. I was like, pardon? He's like, I bet you're feeling pretty smug today. And I said, actually, no, I'm feeling fucking heartbroken because we share a landmass. This isn't a different planet that I go home to, dude. I take one step over a fucking fir tree and I'm in your country.
Yeah, are you allowed to feel remorse even though you don't live in the States?
If your resources run out, where do you think you're going to look first? Like, we're aware. We're in every war with you. We were the first people to Katrina. Like, we're fucking part of the same country. It's an American condition to not believe that. We're with you. We're like attached, literally and figuratively. And so just because some of our leaders draw those geopolitical lines doesn't mean we do. I love Americans. I fucking operate down here 9 months of the year, and I'm for you. In the same way that I think, or I thought, you're for us, and most people are. But this guy at the bar, I haven't been in a fist fight in a while, but I was like, oh, I just want to knock your teeth out right now. Like, the assumption that you would think that I won some sort of fucked up contest because my pot-smoking prime minister, who's a fucking jackass anyway, like, he's handsome, so I win? Like, what kind of curmudgeon, knuckle-dragging fucking logic is that?
You don't win because he's handsome?
No, he's an idiot. I don't win at all. The guy's trying to pump oil through indigenous lands and arrested 2 of my friends who've been in the weed movement for 15 years. Like, not okay. Anyway, that's a whole other podcast. And I say he's an idiot politically. Personally, he's a nice enough guy. He's definitely not a sociopathic fucking dictator. So yes, if there was a comparison game to be had, that would be a thing. But there's not. The same way that I felt for the Koreans and that I feel for Russians and that I feel for people who are in political situations outside of their current control that are fucking them up further.
I want to backtrack. We missed the step on how you went from your first business to teaching at Stanford and kind of the tour of motivational speaking and all of that you are now. What happened between the restaurant and there?
Yeah, so, we started to open a lot of business, and those businesses started to create a lot of cultural identification and like resurge the neighborhood, but at the same time we were gentrifying that neighborhood and we didn't know. So we were an agent of gentrification by co-opting further real estate purchase and rents going higher and displacement. In theory, the places I was taking over were bombed out buildings that had been dormant forever, and I was trying to create employment structures in them. The unintended consequence is that becoming a more desirable neighborhood and rents rising around it. And it created this sort of, I was very, like in my mind, a small part. There's very many schools of thought on it, but we saw an influx of business from young entrepreneurs who really wanted to find their way in Vancouver, which is the second most expensive city in the world from time to time. Around us are single room occupancy hotels, door to door. If you talk to a New Yorker, they're like, yeah, so what? That's everywhere. If you talk to somebody in Canada, they're like, holy shit, that's, a tinderbox. Like, it's not. It's the way that we should be living, because if we're facing our problems on a day-to-day, when we walk out our door, we're more likely to engage in their solution. So in my mind, I was like, let's get everybody down here and we'll all hang out. Well, a lot of those people were just like, okay, well, let's get the homeless out of here now. I was like, oh shit, what are you talking about? No, we can't do that. Like, to the point that it came to a crescendo in the 2010 Olympics where our mayor was like, we're busing all the homeless people out.
That happened in Salt Lake. I'm originally from Colorado. Salt
That's
Lake gave homeless people bag lunches and a one-way bus ticket to our hometown.
I'd like to say that that's rare. It's not. And if you go to San Diego, or you're in California, or you're in the Mission District, or you're in the downtown east side of Vancouver, or shit happens all the time. Services aren't going anywhere. They own the buildings. The SROs aren't going anywhere. Slumlords own half. The government owns the other half. Nobody's fucking going anywhere. So we're all in this together. And so in my mind, I'm like, great, let's have the conversation and create these spaces. So we start to have the conversation and start innovating around models that'll make more sense. Let me do a for-profit restaurant that funnels part of profit into a social innovation hub that then helps other people incubate their businesses. Excuse all the jargon, it just is what it is. And then work on impact. And the people we want to impact most are the marginalized around food security, employment, training, those sorts of things.
So you develop these tokens.
The token was a part of it, yeah. The token was actually came out of a very angry meeting.
Is that the most famous part of it?
Infamous, maybe, is a better reframe of that. So the meeting I go to is with a son and father, and they're creating what they're calling a gift card system for the downtown east side. And it's like a bunch of gift cards, and one says 20, one says 50. I'm probably getting that wrong, I can't remember. And those gift cards, they wanted to be able to be redeemed at Save On and all these other places in the neighborhood, so you wouldn't give people money. You would give them this card, and they could use the card to make sure it went to intended purpose, which was an idea that I'd been playing with in my head, but felt further marginalizing, right? And I was also like, the informal economy operates differently if you don't know anything about it. So I sat down at the meeting, and they'd asked me only as a vendor, right, to come to the meeting, and they'd been working on it for maybe 2.5 years, and I said, this isn't going to work. And they thought it was a love fest, right? And then they like poured like investors, like the whole thing. They're like, what do you mean? I said, it's never going to work. This is why. People from all kinds of corporations come down every winter, and they bring stacks of McDonald's gift cards or Starbucks gift cards, and they feel like they're doing a great thing, and they hand them out. Those same gift cards are then sold to a dealer for a quarter of their price for a rock or for a hit or whatever that may be. That then gets sold back into the street market, which is right out front of my business and buildings, for 3/4 of the price or 2/3 of the price, depending on who you're buying it from. So your gift card creates a boon in the drug trade, which then comes back into my hands for less pricing. And they were like, that's not true. I was like, well, I got 7 years of experience here. It's not only true, it happens every day. And so your gift cards are just going to go to shit because people are just going to trade them for drugs. So they kicked me out of the meeting. They were like, thanks for coming by, essentially. And I was never invited back to the conversation. The thing never launched. But I went home angry. And I was really angry because nobody had thought to ask anybody in the street. And had they just asked one single person in that 2 to 2.5 years, hey, what do you think is a solution here? Or what do you need? Or how could I be best of service to you? They would have already realized, and they would have never started it. But because the assumptions that they had made about how to solve a problem, not having ever lived it, never asking a single human, doing zero research at all, and just implying, or applying, I should say, a solution, we see that all over the world. And so I just want to jump out to one thing, and I'll come back to it. There's a gentleman by the name of Kennedy Odede, and he wrote a book called Find Me Unafraid. And him and I talk about this, and we ended up having a really deep conversation. We were connected. So he worked in the largest slum in the world in Uganda. He was born into it, and like that's where he was. And his whole point was people come, let's say, just for an example, a hypothetical example, Tom Shoes comes in and says, you need shoes, let me give you shoes. Here's shoes, PS shoes, can we take pictures of you with shoes on? He was like, I had fucking shoes. If anybody had ever asked me what I needed, it wasn't shoes. But of course I took the shoes gratefully because I didn't have shit. So Tom's feels great.
And they're making a ton of money.
Of course. And this is not saying they're evil at all. That's not the point of the conversation. The point of the conversation is misdirected resource. Right? If you was Tom's, like, I wouldn't give a shit what Tom's gave somebody. If there was 1 for 1 of something else, if it was a fucking toothbrush, I would still buy the shoes. I mean, I don't. I think they're ugly and they're stupid. But somebody else might buy the shoes, and millions of people would. If you're more honest about what people need and work with them, that's the point. So I went home, and I was so mad. And I woke up at like 3:30 in the morning, and I sent a text message to a designer who was working with me. I said, we need poker chips. My wife at the time had already sort of surfaced the token project as a possibility. And so we just built it out. We got 2,000 of these things printed, and we were like, if we do 2 or 3 redemptions a day, it's a plastic chip, goes in your pocket, it doesn't have a denomination, you buy it from our diner. It's a small gift card. There was only $2.25 or something when we started, and we'll give you a sandwich any time of the day or night. It was just our breakfast sandwich. Let's try that out.
So any one of your patrons coming through can buy these tokens, and if they see someone on the street or a friend or anything
who says, can you help me out, I'm hungry, which is the number one prompt, you can, instead of giving them money, give them this token, and then they can use it and redeem it in a place of inclusion where they feel safe. So we thought we'd do 2 or 3 a day. First day we did 120. We cracked 115,000 this year. We've taken the project all over the place. What the whole point of it was, for me, was not the sandwich. We employed more people. We created another structure that's awesome. But it was the 115,000 conversations that'll happen. You'll get a sandwich. It's going to be delicious. Like, we got 1 of 5. There's a gluten-free option. There's a vegan option. Like, just because you're homeless doesn't mean you don't have dietary restrictions. So that all plays, but you're going to be vis-a-vis a frontline advocate. Because the second you look at a human who's struggling in the face, you know the problem's bigger. I want to swing the vote. Our mayor kept getting in on homeless policies. Like, we know it exists and we know that there's ways to start to solve it, but to gain public interest while also creating an employment structure, creating further empathy, and getting people fed, that's systems design. Yeah. Saying, here's a gift card for $20 is altruism. So what happens from there? We do a reality TV show on the Oprah Winfrey Network called Gastown Gamble, going back a year before that follows our entire journey to building Save on Meats. It launches on the OWN network. I start to do public talks, and my public talks, I do a TEDx. It gets viewed a whole bunch of times. It goes viral. And it's me talking about just being a decent human being, which was revolutionary apparently in 2013. So from that talk, I get approached by a bunch of agents. The agents come to me. They're like, we need you to speak to all these corporations. I was like, fuck yeah, I'll be the Trojan horse. And of course, I'm just wasting my breath there. It's like the token guy who stands on stage at the AGM and tells the story and everybody applauds, and then they go home to their lives and they don't do shit. Mm-hmm. So I come to that realization many years later. I'm like, if I'm going to be on this platform, I think this is just feeding my ego and my bank account, because it's helping me balance the businesses out, because you get paid a lot of money to speak. And it really did help. Our businesses wouldn't be alive if I wasn't a speaker for those couple of years. And so it was servicing something. But again, in systems design, I was like, how can I, or how might I actually create real impact?
You kind of used it while you needed it, and then it helped you evolve into the higher version of yourself.
Definitely. And an actual impact speaker. So how can I tell you about the systems and explain how hiring people with developmental disabilities is fiscally responsible for your company, not just appropriate as a community leader? You don't have to give a shit about people. If you want to make more money, you should hire people who are formerly homeless, formerly in recidivism, or have a barrier of some type. That's just so you can make money. And so I talk about that, and people squirm in their chairs. I'm like, do the math. 80% of people in service turn over every year. Every year. Whether you're running an airport or you're running a hotel, you're running a restaurant. Those people turn over. They're in temporary jobs. It's not a career position for them because they're trying to be an actor, or they're trying to get their PhD. But for a person with a barrier who's at a second chance, people with developmental disabilities or physical disabilities turn over at less than 30% per annum. It's a 50% gap. It costs about $2,000 at median to train somebody. That doesn't show up in the P&L in one place. It shows up scattered because it's breakage, it's misorders, it's management time, et cetera, et cetera. So you're constantly in triage.
So by doing that, you were able to retain your workforce a little bit longer?
And the unintended consequence was my traditional workforce that was going off to do molecular whatever changed their ideas and were like, this is more important to me. I'm not about money, which is the conversation I have about millennials all the time, where people are like, millennials don't care. And I was like, no, they just don't trust you.
Sure.
They care a lot. Yeah. They care more than you ever did.
Yeah.
So I've got a team of millennials that work for me that almost never turn over. And then I've got a group of 58% of my business is people who are extremely barriered. And I have almost zero turnover per annum right now, which is amazing. Like 1 or 2 employees will flip in a 58, 60 person business. So we have consistency. Our customers see the same faces. We have consistency in product. Our cooks make the same stuff. We have an actual lifelong job for people who really need it and are part of a community. And forward-facing, we're able to show an archetype or a model that can literally change the way communities operate. And we're able to float and make money. We have a $20,000 rent per month, which is insane.
Seems like a lot.
It's way too much, and we're working on it. That's what makes it all make sense. When I tell people we pay $250,000 in rent, they're like, selling burgers in the hood? I'm like, this is how. So if I can make this extremely difficult thing work, imagine what you could do in your business that's already making money by doing this, and you'll also be a good person. You get a good person stamp. So all of that in creating systems and design and then consulting for lots of people and taking some global stages around this work. I was working on a prototype of a digital platform. Stanford heard about it, and they reached out to me and said, we'd like you to apply to be a D-School Innovation Fellow. And I didn't know what any of that meant at all.
And now you are one.
I am. I spent a year there, and now I've switched sides to the good guys or the bad guys, depending on who you ask. And I'm adjunct professor of innovation at the University of Southern California. So I teach the doctoral of social work, the innovation design lab, and design thinking lab, virtually to 15 students in each class once a week who are minimum 10-year experience in social work.
Wow.
So they're actual, like, in the coal face of the problem, social workers. And I'm teaching them to demystify everything from business to innovation and giving them the tools because they actually care about the problem.
What a great class.
It's the best. Don't tell USC, but I do it for free.
I would do it for free. What's something that is basically you're terrible at?
I'm terrible at rest. Rest would be the number one thing. Like, I'm trying to get better at it. Even when I try to get better at it, I get prone in work. I'm just still prone in working.
Does that ever backfire in your personal life, like relationships?
Of course. I'm on the road 200 days a year, minimum. And I split my other time between Queens and Vancouver. I'm on an airplane constantly. So I've built structures and allowed people to stand into those roles on a personal level in business. And they're, as a team, better at it than I am solo, a practitioner. And then in my personal life, we just make sure to design around the travel. Mm-hmm. My girlfriend works extraordinarily hard. She's a 70, 80 hour a week worker, and she cares about her job a lot. And so if she was to date somebody who was more focused on staying at home, we'd have a problem. And we still do have problems.
Very hard, yeah.
Like when I'm in New York and I've got like 5 days on the ground and I've got dinner ready and she's hitting me, she's like, oh, it's going to be 10 o'clock. Like, I got to remember, right? But get grounded. But at the moment, you have an egoic spike where you're like, what do you mean? Dinner's on the table.
Yeah.
So you just have to realize that you're going for the same purpose, recapitulate around making sure you're going for the same purpose and that you're supportive consistently. She's just texting me now. She's on a plane to Los Angeles today. Right, so we share a similar trajectory, and we never feel slighted by missing each other. That's a gift, right? Instead of being like, oh, well, when are we going to see each other next? This is ridiculous.
Right.
That's not an energy that I could deal with. It's let's design to make sure that we cross over in this place and are dedicated to each other to do that. And so 4 days can feel like a month, and it recharges our batteries, and we go off and do the work we do.
What do you think happens when we die?
I'd like to think that we become part of a universal resonant energy on the planet.
So like heaven or?
No,
like,
I think we stay here.
Okay.
We leave a resonance, and that resonance might be, so I like to think of it, the analogy of we can only see such a small portion of what's going on the planet because of how we are as humans are built, right? Like
that, like 10% of our brain.
Yeah, or microorganisms, right? If you think about what's actually keeping us alive, if we were to pull open a piece of soil, we see a worm, but there's millions of microorganisms that are responsible for carbon, and that's why no-till soil makes sense and all those things. Those are beings. In the ocean, the things that we're killing, coral and all the microorganisms there, are responsible for us staying alive, oxygen, but there's like literally billions and trillions of organisms that we'll never see that exist here. So I feel like we're part of that spiritual fabric, and that we just go back into it.
Mark Brand, thank you so much for swinging by Blunderbuss and doing this. Thanks so much for being here. It's so good to see you.
You as well, brother. Thanks for having me.
This episode was brought to you by the City of Bozeman, 10 Directions, Hatch, the Yellowstone Theological Institute, Montucky Cold Snacks, the Nova Cafe, Zocalo Coffee House, Whistle Pig Korean, Dean Zesty Booch, Bliss, the Sola Cafe and Market, Shank Construction, Ben Johnson Photography, Loken Productions, Superfluous Industries, and Blunderbuss. A shout out to our editors and media team, Pat Loken, Joseph Sandoval, Allison Gregory, Shannon Hughes, Jessica Byerly, Jacob Desch, Nathaniel Johns, and Nicholas Hill. Do you have an issue that's riddled by gridlock in your community? We want to hear from you. Shoot me a message at tate@iaminterchange.org. That's tate@iaminterchange.org. Until next time, share airtime and don't ruin dinner.